Back friends, welcome back in another video tutorial. So today we are going to discuss a comparative analysis between column chromatography and size exclusion chromatography. Before going to the topic, I just want to recap our previous video that we have discussed on paper chromatography and thin layer chromatography. So in paper chromatography we are using a chromatographic paper strip as a solid phase, and in thin layer chromatography we are using thin layer absorbent like silica, alumina, cellulose, etc. And here our mobile phase is liquid containing the mixture of the solution, and here it is 2, and here both the cases we are placing our strip into a shallow jar containing shallow layer of solvent, and then with the help of capillary action the buffers will rise up the paper, and during this travel they will meet with our sample solution, and along with the buffer our sample solution also starts rising through the paper and facilitates the separation, right? And then with the help of appropriate visualizing agent we can visualize them just like that. So in paper chromatography and thin layer chromatography we can separate small amount of sample, but larger amount of sample separation cannot be done with the help of paper chromatography and thin layer chromatography method, because see, the paper length or the absorbent layer length is limited, right? So it will separate up to a certain extent, and that cannot be enough for larger samples. That is why we need to develop column chromatography stuff. Another important thing that I want to mention, that in case of paper chromatography the separation takes time, but in case of thin layer chromatography it is not. Okay, thin layer chromatography takes smaller time for separation than paper chromatography, as sample will elute out faster in case of thin layer chromatography. Okay, and thin layer chromatography also provide us the choice between solid phase that paper chromatography cannot. So now today's topic, that is column chromatography. So column chromatography help us to separate larger samples, fast things, and this can be done with the help of this column. Okay, so the first thing that we need to know, that our first goal in column chromatography will be to prepare or package the column. Okay, so in the column there will be our solid phase, and we will prepare our mobile phase that containing solution containing the sample, right? So in the column as a solid phase we will take porous solid matrix, okay, with appropriate chemical properties. This chemical property will help us to separate proteins depending on the differences among them. Okay, so here we are using differences in size, shape, charge of the protein, and other properties we can also use. So what we do exactly? So after preparing the column, as you can see, we will add our mobile phase. Okay, so after that the mobile phase will be layered on the top of the solid phase and eventually percolates through the solid phase as a ever expanding band, and that's how separation is going on. And here larger molecule will separate faster or slower. Think about that. So here larger molecule will separate slower because it will experience some hindrance during its travel through the solid phase, but small molecule will exhibit less hindrance during its travel. Okay, so here remember very importantly that small molecule will separate faster than the larger one. Okay, that means small molecule will elute out fast. So now that is the concept of column chromatography. So with the help of this concept you can purify or determine what are the different type of component present in your sample. okay, and it is a very important and popular technique for purification in any research laboratory, okay, and it allow us to use various kind of mobile phases. That are the advantages that I have mentioned, but it has some serious disadvantages too. For example, as you can see, the packaging of the column will not be a joke, right? It takes a good technical skill and also it takes lot of time, okay. And another important thing, that column chromatography is not foolproof and it takes too much time in case of larger samples, and you have to keep constant attention during the separation via column chromatography technique, okay. And the most importantly, if air bubbles entrapped between the solid phase and the mobile phase due to dry packing, it can lead to cracking in the absorbent layer. Absorbent layer means our solid phase, okay. So air bubbles can be entrapped between the solid phase and mobile phase due to dry packing, that facilitates cracking in the absorbent layer. That is the major disadvantage of column chromatography, okay. And most importantly, it takes larger time for preparation, along with it takes a good technical skill to perform. So that are the disadvantages of the column chromatography. And now what are the application of column chromatography? So column chromatography can help you to separate impurities from important compound, and it can also separate metabolites, okay, and it can also separate or help you to determine various components in a particular drug, okay, and it can also analyze, help you to analyze the presence of phytomenadione in drugs and injections, okay. So that are the utilities of column chromatography. So column chromatography, in column chromatography the first step will be the packaging, right, packaging of the column. So here we are using porous solid matrix with appropriate chemical properties. Then we will add the mobile phase, that is the solution containing our sample, okay. So this mobile phase will layered on the top of the column and eventually percolates through the solid phase, okay, and that is how the smaller molecule will elute first and larger molecule will elute later. That is how separation is going on, okay. So this is the concept of column chromatography. Now let us see this one. This is a more zoomed picture of a column, that is how it is look like, and here we are keeping our, we are giving our mobile phase, that means our solution and sample, and it will eventually starts to move down, right, as you can see this layer, okay, and it will be separated by using this step, okay. So now we are going to discuss another important chromatographic technique, that is size exclusion chromatography. It is also referred to as gel filtration chromatography. It is also known as molecular sieving or molecular exclusion chromatography. That is the various type of name of our size exclusion or gel filtration chromatography. So what are the utility of the process? So it is common and similar kind of chromatographic technique just like our column chromatography, okay. Here first of all we are preparing the solid phase. The solid phase will contain porous polymer bead, okay, that is the important thing, and that is the determining factor that separate protein for us. So in the size exclusion chromatography we are separating protein on the basis of size, shape and molecular weight, okay. Let us see how. So when we will add our mixture, so in the mixture the smaller molecules can enter into the porous solid matrix via pores and become entrapped there. Okay. And that can be possible because they are porous polymer beads, and if our samples matches the size of the pore, then they can easily enter inside the via pore, right. So that is how they separated from the flow of the media and become entrapped. Okay. Although the larger molecules that are larger than the average pore size in the column will simply excluded without facing any kind of hindrance, right. So that is why in case of gel exclusion chromatography, larger molecule will elute fast than the smaller molecule, and that is the significant difference that you need to know between column chromatography and size exclusion chromatography. In size exclusion chromatography, larger molecule will elute faster than the smaller one, and in column chromatography, smaller molecule will elute faster than the larger one. Now let us see that if you want to isolate a molecule which is larger in size, then you can use this one or you can use column chromatography. So what will be your preferable choice? So for me, the preferable choice will be column chromatography. Why? Because in column chromatography the larger molecule will separate last, right. So all the debris will be removed out faster, then we will add a elute buffer or elution buffer commonly known as to obtain our sample, so that we can purify them, right. Similarly, in case of smaller molecule separation, we can promote gel filtration chromatography, right. Because in case of gel filtration chromatography, the smaller molecule will elute at last, then in case of larger molecules, all the debris that we have considered will be removed fast, and we can get our smaller molecule as a purified version in case of gel filtration chromatography, right. So that is the important thing that you need to know. Question can be asked from there, that they will tell you that you have to separate, suppose, phenylalanine from a mixture that contain phenylalanine and glycine. So phenylalanine has a larger size than the glycine, so you will opt your column chromatography. On the other hand, if you want to isolate glycine, then you can go back into size exclusion chromatography, right. So that is the important thing that you need to keep in your mind. Another thing, this size exclusion chromatography is low resolution chromatography. That is why it is often employed as the last polishing step of purification. Okay. On the other hand, column chromatography provides us a good separation. That is why we are considering it as a purification step, right. So that is another important thing that you need to know. And disadvantages, if we come on the advantages part of the size exclusion chromatography. So size exclusion chromatography separate molecule faster than the column chromatographic technique, okay, and it will separate in the form of narrow bands, okay, and it can separate 10% differences in molecular weight of the protein, okay. This is a disadvantage. That means protein differing in less than 10% molecular weight cannot be separated with the help of size exclusion chromatography, okay. And another important disadvantage of the size exclusion chromatography that I need to mention, that it is low resolution chromatography, okay. So advantages are, it provide you a good separation within a small time that our column chromatography cannot provide, okay, and disadvantage is it require at least 10% difference in molecular mass for separation, otherwise it cannot separate. Another advantage, it separates molecule in the form of narrow bands with high sensitivity, On the other hand, our column chromatography separates molecule as an ever expanding band. Okay. So, if we want to construct a difference between column chromatography and size exclusion chromatography, so we may write that column chromatography, in column chromatography we are separating protein on the basis of their size, shape, charge and different properties, right. But in case of size exclusion chromatography, we are separating protein on the basis of size, shape and molecular weight. Column chromatography, in case of column chromatography, smaller molecule will elute fast, and in case of our size exclusion chromatography, larger molecule will elute fast. In case of column chromatography, larger molecule will be entrapped in the column, right, or it will exhibit a hindrance in the column, right. But in case of size exclusion chromatography, it will be in case of smaller molecules, right. Smaller molecule will be entrapped by the porous polymer beads that we have used, right. So column chromatography is preferable when we are willing to separate larger molecules, right, because smaller molecule will be elute out faster, and size exclusion chromatography will be preferable when we are willing to separate smaller molecule. Another important thing, column chromatography requires more separation time than the size exclusion chromatography. It requires small time. So that is the difference between column chromatography and size exclusion chromatography that you need to know. So I hope this video will be helpful to you, and thank you for listening to this class. And if you have learned this, so thank you. Bye bye.